Welcome back. All right, right now I'm going to talk about anxiety disorders, OCD, and PTSD. All right, so anxiety disorders. These are disorders that are marked by distressing, persistent anxiety or maladaptive behaviors that reduce anxiety. So anxiety is at this core of this group of disorders. So generalized anxiety disorder, this is where someone is tense, apprehensive. They're constantly in this fight or flight when there's no need to be. So you come around the corner and there's a snarling dog and your body goes into fight or flight. You get that feeling of anxiety, like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Okay, you have a reason for that. You lost your job and you might have to move, okay, and you have anxiety. There's a reason for that. Generalized anxiety disorder is generally there's no reason for that. There's no very specific cause. You're doing the dishes, everything's fine, kids are outside playing, the birds are singing, the sun is shining, everything's fine, and you start having a panic attack. You feel that dread, that fight or flight coming on for no reason. Okay, so that's the difference between generalized anxiety disorder and just anxiety in general. Now, panic disorder, I just mentioned panic attack. Panic disorder is where you have this overwhelming, intense feeling of dread, and your body goes into fight or flight. Your pupils dilate, your breathing increases, your heart rate increases, you might be shaking, your adrenaline dumps, and you feel like you're having a heart attack. Panic attacks feel like having a heart attack. I took someone to the hospital once because my friend thought she was having a heart attack and it was a panic attack. Your chest tightens up. You can't breathe. It's horrible. It is a horrible feeling. Panic attacks, anybody who's having a panic attack should definitely talk to a doctor. There are ways of working around them. Panic attacks, people live in fear of when another one might happen and then start avoiding situations where they might happen. So this is how agoraphobia pops up, or the fear of leaving your house, fear of open spaces. Let's say you go to the store and for some reason something in your environment triggers a panic attack. You have no idea what it is. The amygdala is your remember your amygdala is like the little watchdog, right? Your amygdala goes off like a little chihuahua when there is a threat in your environment. Now, if you've ever been around a chihuahua, they bark at things that you don't see sometimes or don't even exist. So some people have amygdalas that go off when there's no reason to. So they're at the store, it's an uncomfortable environment, and something in their environment sets them off, and so they start to have a panic attack. Well, now you don't want to go to the store anymore because the thought of going to the store reminds you of the panic attack you had, and then you're afraid you're going to have another panic attack, and just that fear of having another panic attack can cause a panic attack. So people start to stay at home, and they don't go out. They don't like socializing because of the fear of the next panic attack. This is why it's very important to talk to a doctor so that you can find a solution so that you can live your life the way you want to instead of being held hostage by your phobias. Now, what's a phobia? Well, a phobia is a fear, yes, but it's a fear times 100. It is persistent, it is irrational, and you try to avoid something or somewhere, some situation, some object, some activity because of this irrational fear. So, like, I'm not thrilled with moths. Okay, I don't like them. You kill them and they turn to dust, and it just seems not cool. I love butterflies, don't like moths. But I am not phobic. Like, I could see a picture of a moth and it doesn't bother me. Whereas some people can be phobic of moths. My aunt was extremely phobic of moths. I mean, like, she would freak out if there was a moth. Absolutely lose it, right? It's irrational. They don't bite. They don't hurt you. She knew it was an irrational fear, a phobia, but she had it. She had it really bad. I remember being a kid and watching her just lose it over a moth being in the house. Now, a lot of phobias have some things in common. So, being alone, fear of flying, fear of storms, fear of water, fear of blood, enclosed spaces, animals, and heights. So, a lot of us have these innate fears in us about these things. And so the fears are then the blue, and then the green are these phobias. What do all of these things seem to have in common? And think about caveman days. Think about you're a caveman, okay? Being alone, okay? You're separated from your tribe. Usually when you're alone like that, you're more exposed and probably going to get picked off by a predator. So death. Flying, well, falling, right? Flying is falling. Most people fear flying because there are heights involved. So again, caveman days, death. Storms. Caveman didn't have Noah to let them know that there was a storm coming. So I used to spend a lot of time out in Lake Powell, and they have these box canyons. And whenever we would go up hiking up the box canyons, you had to bring a radio because there could be a storm several miles away. You didn't know it. Next thing you know, there's a flash flood that comes down the box canyon, and if you're in it, it'll kill you. And there was a family of 7 a few years ago that the entire family got wiped out by this storm that was 1.5 miles away. They didn't even hear it. They didn't even know about it. So storms can kill you if you're a caveman. Also water. So drowning, death, blood. We have an ER, we have Band-Aids, we have Neosporin. So cavemen did not necessarily have that. So ancient cultures that had injuries, a lot of times those led to death. So blood was not a good thing. So like my child has the blood should remain in the body policy. He has always been afraid of bleeding. And I'm with him on that. I think blood should stay inside. Enclosed spaces, so being trapped in a cave, also death. Animals, predators, death. Heights, falling. Again, here, these two are very related. Death. So, to our ancestors, all of these things meant death. Well, all of your ancestors survived to get you to here, and they all survived a lot of these in situations. So maybe those that had these fears and avoided these situations were more likely to live and pass on their genetics. It's a theory. So, oh, my nose itches. So obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. So this is repetitive thoughts that are extremely persistent, these obsessions, and these actions, which are called compulsions, in order to get rid of the obsessions. So, for example, your hand washing, right? So we wash our hands to get our germs off of our hands. But some people have obsessive, repetitive, persistent thoughts that there's germs all over their hands. And in order to get them off, they have to wash them in a very ritualistic manner. And in order to make sure that all the germs are gone, if they don't wash their hands correctly, then those thoughts don't go away. But the actions are there to alleviate those thoughts. So after my son was born, I had a spike in obsessive compulsive thoughts. One of them was that somebody was going to come through the window. And so every night I have to get up and check his window. And even if I'm in bed, I'm nice and warm and comfy and everything's wonderful. And it's like, oh no, I forgot to check the window. So I get up. I have to get up. Otherwise that gnawing thought of somebody coming through his window is bugging me. Now, that doesn't matter. There's a 150-pound dog on the floor, and there's a little 11-pound dog on the bed that I'm more worried about. I still have to get up. I still have to check that window, and then I can go back to sleep. So that obsession of knowing that the window's locked has to be calmed by the action of checking the window. Does it interrupt my life? Is it distressing? Is it dysfunctional? It's irritating sometimes when I said I'm comfortable and I haven't checked the window. But it's not so disruptive that I need to deal with it. By going to the doctor would probably say, well, then just check the window every night. So there is a line where obsessive compulsive thoughts lead into disorders. And that's where it causes distress. Makes you late for work or school because you have to keep checking the door, or you left but couldn't remember if you locked the door, so you had to drive 20 minutes home to check it. It is more common among teens and young adults than older people, but it still can happen in older people and is related to hoarding. which we won't talk about, but you can look it up. Now, most obsessions deal with dirt, germs, or toxins. Other ones, something terrible happening. So that is more of a control issue. Like if I spin in a circle 3 times, nothing bad will happen to my family. Symmetry, order, exactness. Okay, that's about 17%. This is things have to be a certain way. Now, not everyone with OCD has a perfectly organized house. Sometimes someone who has obsessive compulsive behaviors regards to symmetry or order, they have some areas that are very organized and others that are not. If I go to a doctor's office and the pictures are not straight, I will straighten them out. I have to. It bothers me so badly. Again, is it a disorder? No. It doesn't interrupt my life. It's just something I need to do. Also, repetitive behaviors. So the behaviors to quell the obsessions: excessive hand washing, toothbrushing or grooming, repeated rituals in and out of the door, checking doors, locks, car brakes, homework, that kind of thing. Now, post-traumatic stress disorder is an anxiety. Let me go back for a second. When it comes to obsessive compulsive disorder, why is it kind of marked by anxiety? Well, because the obsessions increase levels of anxiety and compulsions lower that anxiety. So anxiety is kind of at the core. It's a byproduct of the whole process. But anxiety is a big one. So PTSD. People with PTSD usually experience haunting memories or nightmares, social withdrawal, jumpy anxiety. So they're hypervigilant to either internal processes or external processes. So they're hypervigilant to sounds or movement, or they're hypervigilant to body processes, pains, gurgling, things like that. Or lack of feeling, numbness, insomnia that needs to last for 4 weeks or more. And it comes after a traumatic experience. So our veterans often come back from war or being in combat with some PTSD. Not everyone, but some of them do. About 7.5% of combatants. I would say probably, well, okay, those are reported rates. Those are people that go to the doctor to get help. There's probably plenty more that don't. About 1.4% of the non-combatants. So people who were in the military but didn't seek combat, doesn't mean that they weren't affected by it. Survivors of accidents, disasters, violent sexual assaults. 2/3 of prostitutes. I had someone try to tell me that only veterans get PTSD, and I will say that that is not true. PTSD is PTSD regardless of how you acquire it. Whether you get it from being in combat or whether you get it from being in an abusive relationship, it is what it is. Women are at higher risk because generally women also are not in a position to be able to control their environment. And there are a lot of women that are affected by domestic abuse, whether it's psychological, physical, sexual, or all three. So when we talk about anxiety disorders, OCD, and PTSD, there is some relation to classical conditioning and operant conditioning. So when it comes to classical conditioning, people that are panic prone or people that are a little bit higher on the anxiety scale, so they're a little bit more anxious. Generally, it's the way they're wired, so their brain is wired a little bit more tightly. They can associate anxiety with certain cues. So like I said earlier about the store, I don't want to go to the store because I have a panic attack, so I'm going to stay home. So that is I'm classically conditioning myself to avoid the store because the store itself brings up the fear of another panic attack, and that causes a panic attack. So the store is now classically conditioned to invoke a panic attack. It becomes this stimulus generalization where fearful events can be similar. So yes, maybe I went to the grocery store and had a panic attack, but now I'm afraid to go to a clothing store because it's also a store. right? So then it becomes, I had a panic attack in one store, but now I'm afraid of all stores. And the reinforcement aspect of this operant conditioning aspect is, if I don't go to the store and I don't have a panic attack, I can say, see, if I avoid the store, I don't have a panic attack. I'm rewarded for not going to the store because I'm not having a panic attack. So it becomes these cycles that need to be broken. And one of the ways of treating OCD and anxiety disorders, and sometimes PTSD, is dealing with the situations that scare us, because then there aren't consequences. You go to the store and you don't have a panic attack. Now you can remember, oh, I did go to the store and I didn't have a panic attack. You go again, oh, I did it again. I did it again. And those start to override that old fear of having a panic attack at the store. Also, cognition, observing others. So remember when I said that my aunt is deathly afraid of moths? Well, I watched my brother, who's 5 years younger, develop a phobia to moths as well. So my aunt was freaking out over this moth that was in the house, like screaming, running around, like crying. It's this terrible freak out, which is very uncommon for my aunt, by the way. She didn't really act that way, but she really overreacted on this one. And I was 8 and my brother was 3, and I watched him watch her. And he developed a fear of moths as well, just by watching her. It happens. Interpretations and expectations shape our reactions. So being hypervigilant, right? So being ready, constantly ready for something to happen, and then something happens, it sets up that reward cycle. So hypervigilance kind of makes us look for it. If you're hypervigilant for something, if you're looking for it, you're going to find it. Here is a non-panic attack example. Let's say you like red cars, and so you're on the road and you're looking for a red car, and you're hypervigilant looking for a red car, and then you finally find one. That will be different than if you're not hypervigilant looking for a red car and you may not see one. So if you are being hypervigilant in any way, you often will find what you're looking for, and that just reinforces that. So some people are genetically predisposed to anxiety and possibly OCD and PTSD. When, like I said, with people that have a very high levels of arousal in the brain, they're wired. I call it wired, being tightly wound, tightly wired. You just have a propensity to react with more anxiety than some people who are more mellow and chill and have lower levels of anxiety. And also anyone has gone through a trauma. So trauma changes your brain, whether it's childhood trauma or war, combat, being in an abusive relationship. It can change your brain in such a way that new fear pathways are activated. You become more hypervigilant to danger detection. Your impulse control kind of decreases, and you end up with these loop patterns in your brain that will continue to keep you on this hypervigilant, anxious cycle. And if you think about it, our ancestors that were more hypervigilant probably stayed alive. So it is something that could be a biological carryover that we have. So there's a couple interesting theories that I've read recently regarding anxiety and how anxiety probably kept our ancestors alive. It is part of the fight or flight system. We know the fight or flight system has kept us alive in the past. And anxiety kind of hijacks that system and overrides it and turns it into hyperdrive. So making sure or reducing the level of anxiety back down to normal is helpful for many, even if your anxiety level is a little bit higher than others. So the obsessive compulsive brain right here is an area, the angular cingulate cortex, that sends off information to other areas of the brain. People with obsessive compulsive disorder usually have a very active, overactive prefrontal cortex in decision making, especially in awareness of errors. So people with OCD often have problems with errors. So they're more prone to see errors and then respond negatively to them. So that's that for anxiety and PTSD and OCD. And check in for the next one.